Hello there, my lovely sunwalkers. Welcome back to another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads. And today's episode, we're featuring Joseph Lewis, who is a fellow educator and author. I had the chance to sit down with him recently, and what we go through is quite the gauntlet of discussion. We cover everything from how our lives did and did not affect our writing in certain ways all the way to looking at why it's so important to focus on what your readers want while also giving them a little bit of what they're not expecting too. So buckle up. Let's get rolling, guys. Welcome to another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads. Thank you, my dear lovely sunwalkers, for joining us once more for another author podcast with Listening to the Voices in Our Heads. And who do we have here today? Tell us all about yourself, sir.
Hi, my name is Joseph Lewis. I've been published since 1960. I've been in education. This is my 46th year in education. I've been a teacher, coach, counselor, administrator, and now I'm back teaching as an online learning facilitator for kids, face-to-face as well as virtual. I enjoy it, like it.
I'm kind of getting into doing a little bit of the same in the fall myself, 1 foot in each pond, it feels like. So, as far as you said you were an educator, what books and genre do you write, first of all?
I write thriller, crime, detective. Um, they While they're aimed mostly at adult, I've had young adolescent readers, and so I kind of bridge that gap. And I think it works for me because my main characters tend to be adolescents, along with a couple of cops thrown in.
So, just wanted to clarify because I've worked at some schools in the past where we had what we called pro security officers. They were a representative from the school, from the sheriff's office that worked
Sure.
for the school board. Was it a similar situation? Did you occasionally have legitimate officers who worked with programs in your schools? Did that influence it? If so?
Yes and no, really. I really am a voracious reader. Baldacci, Sanford, Patterson, Conley, those guys. And I just, they really inspired me for various different reasons. Patterson, I really like the way he puts together a book. His chapters are short, they lead into one another, they don't really end cleanly. It just keeps the reader moving. Sanford has this way, a poetic way of describing setting, place, atmosphere, and and Baldacci is just from the moment you open a book to the time you end, it's all action adventure. And I first got started writing when I was a counselor. I was working with the Wetterling Foundation for Stranger Abducted and Sexually Exploited Kids. And I went out and I worked with educating parents, educating kids, educating teachers on how to protect kids, how to keep them safe from predators. And then I met my wife. We had our son adopted, Will, at age 7, and then we gave birth to Hannah. And instead of when I was doing these talks, instead of picturing Johnny Gosh or Eaton Patz or Elizabeth Smart, I was picturing my son Will and my daughter Hannah. And so I had to step back a little bit. But I always wanted to give back. I wanted to tell the story of missing kids and how we work to get them back safely and then reintegrate themselves into their lives back home. And that's really what the first 4 books I've written were about: taking lives, stolen lives, shattered lives, and splintered lives. It's telling that story of getting missing kids home and then what happens to them once they are home. How do they fit back in?
That's a piece a lot of people forget about, especially in sitcoms and things. They don't always go into this was the next day, and that's very intriguing that you found that skip over in literature, especially.
I stumbled over that actually. When I was marketing or trying to push Stolen Lives, which was the first book that I had written, I had actually written it as a standalone. And then the publisher at that time they said, we really like this book. We want to publish it, but we want to do two things. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to edit it like crazy, which I
Oh
did
no.
anyway. But she said, the first thing we want to do is we want to make it a series. And that really gave birth to not only getting the kids back, but then how do we work with the kids once they are back? What happens to
Correct.
them? And then she said, the second thing we want you to do is write a prequel to introduce the reader to the series. And that gave birth to Taking Lives. And so what I did was Stolen Lives takes place, and then I backed Taking Lives 2 years previous to kind of
Hmm.
introduce three main characters. And I left it intentionally on a cliffhanger so that it would then go into Stolen Lives.
And would you say your cliffhanger was substantial to get you past the first book into the second book, third one you wrote?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. In fact, if you were to look at Amazon, the reviews that I've gotten and the ratings I've gotten, everything is out of 5 stars. Everything's about a 4 or higher. So I
I
think they
saw
they
that
really like it.
myself. Yeah, I was looking through your reviews, kind of getting a feel for your tone as an author, and looked through the first book, Stolen Lives, a little bit. But at the same time, I, as a teacher, see intersections where you might have students who, if they or a colleague found your book, they're going to be like, oh, that's me. That's totally me. But
Oh
you
yeah.
just admitted it's more based on your own children.
No, it's not really based on my own children. It's based on the kids that spoke to me in the counseling office, or
Ah.
or the research that I did working with missing kids and things like that. Now, my other books that I've written, Caught in a Web, that dealt with drugs, gangs, and revenge, something that's rather current that takes place in high school. The next one, Spiral into Darkness, um, it really came about with a conversation I was having with my psychology teacher. She and I were discussing nature versus nurture, what comes first. And then
Oh.
that evening, I went home and watched a Criminal Minds episode about a serial killer. So the thought struck me, is a serial killer born, or is a serial killer made by the
Right.
life circumstances and events? And so that was a genesis of Spiral into Darkness. Um, Betrayed, I wanted to bring George back into the forefront, but it ended up being Brian's story. But it takes place on the Navajo Indian reservation where George is from. And it talks
Hmm.
about, it was a late night phone call, a missing kid, a murdered family, and no one's talking. And that was what Betrayed is about. And I chose that title specifically because it's betrayed on multiple levels. Now, those three books won me a total of 6 awards. So I'm
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm really pleased with that. And my newest, Blaze In, Blaze Out, is more cops than kids, and it's about
Hmm.
revenge, and the fact that sometimes a person wanting an end to someone or to something doesn't worry about collateral damage, and that's
That's a
really
good point.
and that's what that book is about.
So, when your students or colleagues have found it, were there interpretations of your books similar to what your reviews say? Really, really strongly written, things of that nature?
Oh, sure. And then you always have the detractors saying this is trash, rubbish, and all that stuff. And you take the good with the bad. And fortunately for me, I've had much more good than I've had bad, and I'm pleased with that.
It's wonderful to hear. I've had a couple of students find me. I know some of you watch Don't Lie to Me, and they kind of have said the same. It's like, I see this, but they have their commentary of what I could improve. If you really want to help me, guys, let me know. He saw my technical issues a little bit earlier, guys. The students would have fixed that way faster than us, I think.
Isn't that the case,
So,
right?
um, as far as when exactly did you start writing versus teaching? Was it writing first and then education second? I just wanted to clarify.
No, I was a teacher counselor writing at night. And so I was an educator by day, and I wrote at night. My routine really is to um, right around supper time, after that, I sit down for about an hour and a half, excuse me, and
Hmm.
maybe 2 hours. And what I do is I always read the previous night's work first. It does two things for me. The first thing that happens is I'm able to edit, change, revise a little bit. But the biggest thing that does for me, it puts me in the mindset for what I'm going to write that evening. And so I that's been my routine for just about ever.
And to kind of think of it from an educator's point of view, at least from the way I was taught to teach, to word it poorly, you're supposed to do that at the beginning of your classes anyway. You review, then you learn new
Hmm.
stuff. So it seems like that overlapped a little bit into your routines, possibly. Is that a
Yeah.
truism or just,
I know, I
oh,
think that's
wow?
true. And I didn't really think about it that way, but that is very accurate the way you stated that. Yes.
See, students, the crazy things that we do does help you. So, as far as your writing method, you got a little bit into how you draft, review, and edit a little bit along the way. Do you use any specific programs to help you out to do that with, or tools?
I use ProWritingAid. That has helped a great deal, especially with the editing. And then I basically write in Microsoft Word.
So, you start in Word and go to ProWritingAid or back and forth?
It's back and forth. It is ProWritingAid is a Word add-on. And so
Mm.
I'm able to write, and then it'll pop up. You may want to consider this, add a comma here, add a period, that kind of thing as I'm going. Sometimes it gets in the way of what I'm trying to write, and so I'll ignore it until
Hmm.
the following evening.
So, is it a paid service you go with, or is it like a browser extension you just tack it on for free? Because I know
No, it's
Grammarly has something similar, but it's paid.
right, and ProWritingAid is also.
Okay, so for aspiring authors, I hear they're invaluable tools and worth the money because
Oh my gosh, yes, I would recommend it
Word
highly.
Word has its own editing feature, but it's
It's
basic.
it's very basic and rather weak. Yes.
That's a good way to word it. Unless you really sit down with it as a writer yourself to kind of tailor your usage. As far as writing itself, are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
Honestly, I fly by the seat of my pants. I start out. I subscribe to Stephen King's theory that it is the character that makes the story. It's not the action. I mean, when you think about the movie Jaws, for instance, the main character was a shark, and it was all about this shark eating people and then trying to do away with the shark. You did not have a whole lot of investment at all in the people, really. You liked the captain, you liked
Mm-hmm.
the sheriff, you liked the Richard Dreyfuss character, the marine biologist kind of guy, but
Yes.
but you didn't really get to know them. Whereas in Stephen King's world, and like I say, I subscribe to it. To me, it is the character that drives the story. And so I always start out with an idea. I have a question that I want to answer. I
Mm-hmm.
have an idea that I want to explore, but I always do that through my characters. And so that's why if you were to look at some of the reviews that I've gotten, especially most recently with Caught in a Web, with Spiral, with Betrayed, and now I'm finding with Blaze, it is the characters that the readers really enjoy and like. They have their favorites, and um, I'll be strung up if anything happens to any one of them, because they have their favorites.
Yes, I'm going to be running into that. I got a glimpse ahead at one of my characters, and I'm not going to give away gender. They told me, heads up, I'm not sticking around for the rest of the series. And I'm like, but I need you. Has that ever kind of happened to you?
I had a conversation early on, and I want to say it was with Caught in a Web
Hmm.
or it was Spiral, one of the two. My daughter is one of my first eyes, Emily. She's my youngest. And I was bouncing an idea off Emily about I was thinking on offing one of my favorite characters, one of my readers' favorite characters. And she looked at me, she goes, "If you do that, I will never read another book that you write." And I thought, well, Emily, life happens, and sometimes we can't really control that. It's not like Disney where it's happily ever after. And she pointed at me and she says, "Well, it ought to." And this was,
Oh,
you have to
yeah.
flash back a little bit to 2014 when my son Will was shot and killed in Chicago.
So
He
sorry.
was walking along a sidewalk after a photo shoot. He was a photographer, and he had gotten some lunch and did a little bit of shopping. He was walking along a sidewalk when one gang spotted a rival gang member, and Will happened to between one party and the other. 10 shots were fired, one bullet struck somebody, and that somebody was my son Will, and he died. And so, it was just an absolute random act, senseless random act. And had Will taken a minute or two longer in the restaurant, had he taken a minute or two later as he was shopping,
Or
he
picked
would
a
have served.
restaurant further away, even.
Yes, he would have survived. But that's life happens. But I
Mhm.
did make that promise to M that where possible, there will be um, happy endings or happier endings.
Mhm.
They might be uncomfortable, but I want to mirror life as much as possible.
I agree. I try to very much do the same in my own writings. And um, someone who read my books recently said, I hope you're not going to do what I think you're going to do with this set of siblings. Because if you do, I'm going to be mad at you. And I'm like, I make no promises.
Yeah.
As you said, it's about them. They are in control.
Yeah, really, they are. And I don't know that the reader understands that as much as, as an author or writer, we would
Mhm.
like them to, because sometimes as you're writing, and I realize the characters come from me. I get that. And I realize that it's my fingers on the keyboard. But what the reader doesn't understand is sometimes as a writer writes, a thought comes or words happen, and the characters just do what they want to do. And the best thing to do is what I think it's Louis L'Amour or one of those guys said, just get the hell out of the way
Yep.
and let the characters go.
I understand that. I learned that the hard way with my second book. There's a thing that happens, and I literally wrote it and said, no, that didn't happen. I couldn't write anything for 3 weeks because I kept trying to circumvent it.
Hmm.
Can I go back and change something so this? Nope. No, it has to happen sometimes. And
Yeah.
you're right. That's where it really, truly mirrors life. So, in a way, it is our job to make the best of it, just like
Yes.
we would in real life.
And move out of the way. Let it happen.
And in a way, you're kind of even teaching that life skill to your readers. I remember one of my students, they were homeschooled most of their life, and they had never read any of the Harry Potter books until high school. They're in 10th or 11th grade, and they got to, spoilers, a certain godparent's death. And they got mad. They got so mad, and I said, stop. How many of us have lost grandparents, godparents, aunts, uncles tragically?
Sure.
It's life. And also, in a way, for that plot, the rest of the story wouldn't have gone the way it did had that character not died.
Right.
So, is that, do some of your character deaths have that great of a reach then? That it's still felt by characters 2, 3 books later, kind of deal?
Yes. I can say that I'm working on a follow-up or actually a continuation. Um, and it's called Fan Mail. And I'm on
Ooh.
page, I'm not quite to 75-ish, something, I'm in that neighborhood. But I
Mm-hmm.
do know exactly how it's going to end. I know what the last words are going to be. I know what the last scene is going to be. This is the first time that that has ever happened in the 8 books that I've written. This is my ninth coming up. and I know how it's going to end. And honestly, that makes it a little bit easier to write because I know what I need to do to get there.
Right.
Whereas in the other books that I've written, I didn't necessarily know the ending until I was nearing the ending.
You kind of went on the journey with your characters in a
Absolutely.
way.
Absolutely.
You're so lucky. I have 10,000 words to my third book written, and I already know how it ends. I'm not happy because it's not a happy ending. Sorry, guys, it's not. And this whole book is just going to be me going, that's horrible, that's horrible, that's horrible. Now we're at the end. Can it get better? So I wish I kind of had not gotten that image so soon. I consider you very lucky indeed for that. Though, on the other end of the spectrum, have there been times where you've gotten to the end and had the option to write 2 or 3 endings?
I've explored with Spiral into Darkness. I had an option. It came to me, I could have gone 2 different ways with an ending, and I chose the one, and I'm happy with it. As
Wonderful.
one fan, as one of my followers who had read all of my books said, I love your books. I didn't always agree with your decisions with the
Hmm.
characters, but I really like the books. And I think Stephen King also has a statement that says, once you write the book, it's no longer yours, it's the reader's. And it's and
That's
it's
true.
and it's the reader to interpret, it's the reader who will live it, and it'll be the reader who will think about it. And I think that person, had a specific idea of how she wanted to see one of the
Mm.
characters act or react, and that's okay because it's her book. I mean, it's the way she read it. Whereas others were perfectly fine with it. It made them a bit uncomfortable, but
Mhm.
they were okay with it.
So, have there therefore been times where if you released a second edition of a book, you changed something for the fans' sake, or no? Or would you ever
No,
consider doing that?
no. The closest that happened was with Taking Lives, in the Lives trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the I Once the first publisher was no longer in the picture, the rights come back to me. My
Mm-hmm.
current publisher, Black Rose Writing, decided we want to reissue them. They're good books. And
Wonderful.
then that gave me the opportunity then to revise and to edit a little bit more, but I did not change things substantially. I softened some things. I made some, I think, wiser decisions as a writer, not necessarily in terms of character, but in terms of my writing. And so I think they're cleaner, better books at this point. But I did not change the action, and I don't think I would have because it felt right at the time I first wrote it.
That's a good way to word it. You're still going with that initial gut instinct
Oh,
of
yeah.
this is the world.
And honestly, I believe it very strongly. As a counselor, when I was going through the program to get my counseling credential, I had a professor to say that if you have a hunch, you bet a bunch because your gut doesn't lie. And
Correct.
that is a philosophy of life that has borne true to me in so many different ways and so many different times. And I find it more so now in my writing.
That's a good reflection because you've been writing for a very long time, so you've got a good judge of me in the beginning versus me after I've learned
Hmm.
too.
And
And
there was another reader of mine who said, I made the statement, I think each book I tend to be getting better. I tend to be getting a stronger my writing is stronger. And she looked at
mhm,
me rather oddly and said, "Why wouldn't that be the case? Your writing is going to improve just because you are writing more." And I
mhm.
find that you look at Taking Lives to my newest that's out, Blaze In, Blaze Out, and I think the writing is so much more stronger. It's more definitive. There's less iffiness in my writing.
And part of that is also because you know the characters so well
Yes,
at this point too,
absolutely.
because you probably have a core of characters that you've written how many books on now, so
Yeah.
they're never leaving your head and never going to stop talking, right?
No, a writer's work, what I think another misconception for the reader is sometimes they view that when the laptop is turned off and put away and I'm watching TV with my wife or reading a book or whatever, that I'm not thinking about the story. And that is absolutely not the case. It's 24/7.
Uh-huh.
If I'm not thinking, I'm dreaming. And what I do is I play with this character in this situation, or I might change a situation. What happens if? What happens if there's another character in this particular situation? And so I'm always thinking about, and I call it pre-writing in my head. Before I
Basically
ever hit the
is.
keyboard with my fingertips, I've thought about a lot of the things I'm about to write.
Very much the same here. And it drives, I don't know about your family, but it drives my husband insane. Because we'll be watching something, and for no reason whatsoever, I'll chuckle, react, and he sometimes might as well look at me and be like, okay, was that you or one of your characters who thought that was funny, kind of deal. It's not my fault that something in real life was something I could not make up because it was so well said, or it was just that funny. Yes, it's going in the book.
Yeah, yeah.
Are your friends and family weary of what they say around you, thinking it's
No,
going to end up in your books?
no, not
Which
really.
mine wouldn't be. Husband needs to let that go on my end, apparently. So, as far as you've mentioned several life experiences, losses, gains included. Are there any ones in particular in relation to education that you could say would be the number one thing that influenced your writing?
Wow.
Or even a top three, since I kind of laid that one on you thick.
Yeah, I don't know if I can go with just one. I mean, certainly the death of my son. If you
Mm-hmm.
look at, for instance, I have a character Brian who, in a couple of different situations, he has contemplated his own death or death of others, and I'm sure, absolutely certain, that that has come about regarding or dealing with or a result of the death of my son. In terms of counselor interactions or teacher interactions with kids, it's what I've seen every day. When I
Mm-hmm.
stand in the hallway and I listen to kids talk, or I watch them act, or I'm in the cafeteria supervising and I'm watching them interact with each other, all of that is fodder and it's fair game for my writing. And so it's kind of neat in that I have friends of mine saying, well, am I ever going to be in one of your books? Or at least you can use my name, that kind of thing. And to be honest, in Blaze In, Blaze Out, I used four friends. Their names, their characters, two of them are absolutely diametrically opposite of what they are in real life. In my book they're despicable. Um,
You just went with their foil, essentially.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh man. I have a group of friends in my books that are reflected. Many people know them as the winged ones. And a couple of them have said, I wrote that character for you not to be smarmy. I heard you, Baka, the first time. But you're right. Sometimes that character, that person influenced you more than you realized a little bit.
Hmm.
So would there be a third then, you'd say? Other than just
I
like
would think
people you run into at work or in real life.
I would say the influence of family.
Mm,
I'm the second youngest out of 10. We're a close family. We did not have a whole
right.
lot of money growing up. Family is very near and dear to me. I got married late in life and had our children, at pushing 40 and beyond. And so
Wow,
it
congratulations.
so I would say family is so important, and that comes out strongly, I think, in my writing.
Very much the same here. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so I, with all my cousins on my dad's side, there were so many of us running in and out of the house, so I completely understand, and that's very much a truism in my books as well. There's, like I said, a group of siblings. They're basically super close best friends that if they had their choice, they would have been born siblings, basically.
Hmm.
And you follow them through a lot of the chaos of every book, and it starts as early as book 1. So I think even just being one of many siblings probably is what gave us that inspiration for the
Sure.
amount of people.
Hmm.
Um, as far as your characters go, you said you're more of a whatever comes out of your fingertips is whatever comes out of your fingertips. Did you ever find that you had to craft your characters in a way, and I'm looking more because we've talked about how some people in your real life have influenced your characters. Do you have like character tracking sheets or anything like that, just to remind you of, hey, this happened in book 1, not book 2 even?
No, because the reason why I do that, and it's purposeful on my part.
Mm-hmm.
If what, for instance, one of my characters, Brett, who is and George, they appeared in Taking Lives and have been all the way through now through Blaze and Blaze Out. As we grow through life, and my book started when those kids were 12.
Oh
Now
wow, so
they're
you
now
see
they're
them
age
grow up.
6. Yeah, they're now 16. And so I allow for the fact that they're going to be influences on them that change their personalities, their outlooks on life, what they might say, what they might do. And so I think that's only natural in terms of life, is to not pigeonhole those kids, but to
It's
allow
true.
them to be able to grow and change and morph.
Agreed. And I think society makes kids feel like they have to be pigeonholed, if that makes sense. Like
Yes,
they're locked into, these are your options, get over it. And that's not
right.
always true.
No, it's not. Mm-mm.
And I'm so glad to hear that another educator zeroed in on that as being important for writing too. So we're getting ready to wind down here, my lovely Sunwalkers. I wanted to double check with our guests, though. Do you have any authors or other creative mindsets you'd like to give a shout out to? Someone you might be reading recently, or any book recommendations?
Well, I told you who my favorites are, and they're
Yes,
all in the
good
thriller crime,
choices.
and they are my favorites. They're my go-tos. But there are some independent writers out there, indie writers that I think are terrific. Ricky Treon, Treon,
Yes.
is phenomenal. His writing is substantial. There is, and I don't necessarily read fantasy all that much or dystopian, but there's a writer, Tina O'Haley,
Mm-hmm.
who is phenomenal. She 2 books, and it's the kind of book that you have to read more than once because she layers so much in there, and her descriptions of atmosphere and setting are just phenomenal.
I would
Um,
love to see her process from beginning to end in a book
she
because of those
outlines.
reasons.
Yeah,
She would have to.
she's an outliner. I did an interview with her on for my website, and one of the things she talked about was she does outline. It's a very sketchy outline, a very basic outline,
Mm-hmm.
because she wants that interplay, the spontaneity. But she's one who outlines, and with her writing, you almost have to
Yes.
outline
It's
because
so
it's so strong, so
rich.
good. There's a horror writer out there by the name of I have to say that correctly because I say horror and not the horror writer, but it is
I'm from Maryland, so we say it wrong. Sorry.
yeah, it's J.T. Atkinson, who's a very interesting writer. Um, John Hazen is another. There are some really good independent writers, and I think the misnomer, even with my own family, they're thinking I'm making a mint. as I'm writing my books. And honestly, I'm writing because I really like the creative process. I really enjoy telling a story. I'm not making a bunch of money. I wish I did. You know,
Agreed.
I wish I was at the top of USA Today's bestseller list or New York Times or whatever, and maybe I will be at some point. But
Me-
I think the reader has this misconception that we're all filthy rich and rolling around in money and mansions and driving limousines and things. And that just really
Mhm.
isn't the case. For the select few, you know, your Patterson, Baldacci, those guys, they're able to make a nice living doing what they love to do. Whereas the rest of us, we have our day jobs that we are living by. And I think sometimes readers forget about that or don't know that.
Very, very, very true. I'm an indie author myself, and I often tell people I'm a full-time teacher, and then this happens around it.
Yeah.
So it, in a way, is nice, but that reader misconception, I think, also goes a little bit into, well, if you were rich and famous, traditional publishing is the way you should go. I'm sorry, Miss Mill. I tried to get you to come up on my lap and you wouldn't. I apologize. I have a cat interrupting. But no, very much I agree. And the books and authors you've mentioned are excellent choices. As far as any questions for me, would you have any for me?
No, not off the top of my head. You know, it feels like I've known you forever, you know, just doing this interview. And that's always a nice thing. There's a comfortableness, and I just really appreciate it. You made it very easy.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm the teacher that I tell kids, if you need someone to talk to, be aware I might have to report it depending on what it is because, well, my job. But at the same time, if you're just having a bad day, can I come and sit in your room for lunch for like 5 minutes and just complain about how bad my morning was? I'll see you at lunch.
Hmm.
And that's just how I apply everything to every conversation. So thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
Hmm.
And thank you to everybody who joined us for today. We're going to go ahead and sign off here. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.